even if you believe that Joseph is the author, it's pretty remarkable he was able to keep all these things consistent.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Saints Unscripted. I am David Snell. I'm your host today, and I'm here today with Stephen Murphy, a very special guest and friend of mine. Stephen is, he's got his own YouTube channel called Mormonism with the Murph, and he's from Ireland and is currently living in England. Did I get
Yep,
that right, Stephen?
that's right.
But you've got your own channel. Stephen's got his own channel where he kind of explores all things the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, lots of Book of Mormon content, lots of looking into kind of the historicity of things and historical issues. But today, what we're going to be doing is looking at kind of Stephen's top 5 list of best evidences that are supporting the Book of Mormon, supporting the historicity or the authenticity of the Book of Mormon. So we're really excited to have Stephen on today. Stephen, give us a little bit of context for where you're coming from with this, and then we can jump in.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me back on. I love Saints Unscripted. I love the last episode we did. So when you interviewed me about a bit about my faith journey, I sort of shared my crisis of faith, having doubts, leaving the church. And there were some things in apologetics, some evidence I saw in favor that opened my mind up again. But the primary thing that caused me to believe again in the Book of Mormon, in the restoration, in the truth claims of the church, was primarily my spiritual experiences and believing that I had sort of a revelation or an answer from God. And then over the years, you're still sort of researching things and figuring things out. So with my channel, that I want to dive in, as you said, the church history topics, truth claim topics, and look at the criticisms and the arguments going against. I want to look at the best apologetic answers or scholarship that I can find. I want to interview experts on the topic, and I want to look at the evidence in favor. And the Book of Mormon, it's foundational. Like, it is the keystone of our religion. It is the convincing evidence that Joseph Smith is a prophet, and really Joseph Smith and the church, it all rises and falls with the Book of Mormon. So I wanted to do a series diving into the Book of Mormon, and there are some like criticisms or some concerns that I had that I wanted to really dive into. And I also want to look at the best evidence as well and try to come to some sort of consensus or conclusion of my view on, do I believe it's historical? What's my views on the translation? Those sorts of things. So I want to give a disclaimer. This video isn't to say that there's no good critical arguments against the Book of Mormon. And I explored some of those in my episodes, things like DNA or King James Bible material or Deuteronomy Isaiah or some of the anachronisms. And it's also not to say that there's no plausible or respectable naturalistic theories. There's some which I don't think are very compelling, and there's some where like, okay, I can understand some of those arguments, but I want to try to look as objectively as I can, acknowledging why I'm still a believer and I have that bias, looking at all the data. What do I think is most likely when it comes to the Book of Mormon with its origins? From both an intellectual standpoint, there were certain evidences in favor that I found quite compelling. And I felt that if I were to deny my spiritual experiences and go with naturalistic theories, I don't have really good debunking answers or reconciliations to these things. And often you'll hear, critics say, or some unbelievers, that believers were believing in the Book of Mormon based upon feelings or like a subjective emotional experience, with all data or evidence going to the contrary. And if that were the case, then I think that would be kind of problematic. And I think that I would call into question my spiritual experiences. But if there is plausible evidence to still maintain faith, not to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, then one can hold on to their spiritual experiences. I'm going to reiterate this at the end, but I think the foundation for our testimony should be a spiritual witness, but that these secondary evidences can help strengthen and lend support or help in times of crisis or open someone up to the possibility if they have shut the door on the Book of Mormon being true. So that is my sort of context and disclaimer, and the things which I'm not a scholar, I'm not an expert, and I won't be able to go into as much depth as scholars can, but these are some of the things that I found quite compelling in favor for the Book of Mormon.
Well, and I'm glad that you mentioned the kind of the spiritual side of things. Like, I think it is important to understand that at least for me, I don't expect to be able to prove that the Book of Mormon is true. Like if the like I don't think that God intends for us to be able to do that. But I do think that God understands the need to kind of appeal to a rational mind, and to provide enough evidences to bolster faith, but not necessarily to, academically force you to believe in the Book of Mormon. Let's jump right in then. So what's the first kind of point you want to hit? The first kind of evidence that stuck out to you?
So the first thing I would say is the miraculous coming forth of the Book of Mormon, the translation, how it was produced. So Joseph, he received the plates in 1827. He began translating with Martin Harris. I began early on 1828. 116 pages were lost, but the Book of Mormon, as we have it today, was dictated between April to June 1829, and scholars did it probably close to like 60 to 75 working days, so just over 2 months, which is a really short period of time. And it's 588 pages. And the eyewitnesses and scribes are quite unanimous that there wasn't any manuscript that Joseph had. He wasn't working off any notes. There was no book, that he was either consulting the translation instruments. Some accounts refer to the Urim and Thummim, or the Nephite interpreters, other to seer stone, placing one of those instruments maybe in a hat. And Emma would even say that Joseph would, after a translation session, he'd stop and then take a break. And when he'd come back, he would just pick up from where he left off. And if that is the case, that is an amazing memory. And no pun intended here, but orally dictating a book in 2 months that's 588 pages is just something that the average Joe does not do. It's quite impressive, and he had no prior authorship experience. And a lot of people say that this was beyond Joseph's natural capabilities. I think that's quite impressive. And many of the witnesses say that, it was miraculous. It was by the gift and power of God. And I think what adds to the impressiveness of the coming forth of the Book of Mormon is just how complex the Book of Mormon is. It's not just 588 pages, but there's a lot of consistency and complexity to the work. Like there's over 200 named characters. There's lots of different plot lines. There's 3 different migrations and calendar systems, and there's different records and record keepers. There's a currency system as well. And there's also a lot of geographical references. I believe there's close to about 600 geographical references that are all kept spatially consistent, internally consistent, which, if Joseph didn't have any notes or any other materials, naturalistically, he would have had to have had a mental map in his head, which he just kept everything completely consistent, which is quite amazing. And I think other complex parts are, for example, like the allegory of the olive tree in Jacob 5. Like it's really, really long. And for him to have just produced that, like in a creative oral dictation, is quite amazing. Um, I think that chiasmus in Alma 36 as well, it's a very long chiasmus. And we talk about chiasmus in a little bit, but him just being able to orally produce that without any notes or any text, it's quite remarkable. And one of the things that stood out to me, that really not just Joseph's creative genius, but also his memory, is in the Book of Ether, chapter 1. It lists like 40 Jaredite kings, and then it talks about them in reverse order throughout the narrative. And unless you surmise that Joseph was peeking at the manuscript, but I think the witnesses would have called him out for that, that's just amazing memory. So I feel like, this doesn't necessarily prove the Book of Mormon is divine or historical, but I find like that really impressive, the difficulty of doing a creative oral dictation, him, coming back after breaks, and he would stop after he dictate, the scribe would read it back, and then they would continue. So there'd be lots of things that would interrupt the flow as well. And all these things he would have to keep consistent in his head. And I think this makes the Book of Mormon, to me, more impressive. It really raises the bar, and it makes it seem like this is quite miraculous. Even if you believe that Joseph is the author, it's pretty remarkable he was able to keep all these things consistent. So I think that's definitely an evidence for the Book of Mormon, the rapid dictation, the time frame, no notes, no manuscript, and just how complex the book is.
And I think that maybe from a critical perspective, sometimes I'll hear people say, "Oh, well, he had years beforehand to kind of formulate these stories in his head and talk about them to his family,
Right.
share stories with his family." And I think that's largely based on like one quote from his mom
Yes.
his in her book that she wrote about Joseph Smith's history. And it's like you can go that route. Like you can believe whatever you want, but for me, it's like there's no there's no match. Like he's the complexity of the Book of Mormon, like these aren't just stories that he's telling around the family campfire, like
Yeah.
it's way more complicated than that. And I think it's so interesting how the claims about Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon have shifted over time. Cause like early on, like when the book was first published, people just thought this book is stupid. Joseph Smith is stupid. It makes sense
Ignoramus.
that this ignoramus wrote this book. But over time, we've come to this place now where people realize, like, okay, this book actually isn't like it isn't as simple as we thought it was. Like, it is complex. There's a lot going on here, um, and so now a stupid Joseph and a stupid book has become this is actually a really complex book, which means Joseph must have been this kind of secret genius, like secretly studying all of these different topics about the ancient world and still managed to, fit everything together so perfectly in the Book of Mormon. And it's just it's such a stretch for me to personally believe that. But anyways, with that we've spent enough time on that first topic. Let's move on to the next one.
Okay.
What's the next one you have in mind?
So I think the witnesses of the gold plates is a good evidence for the Book of Mormon and the authenticity of the plates. So we have both the three witnesses and the eight witnesses. So the three witnesses, we have David Whitmer, Martin Harris, Oliver Cowdery, who claim that they saw the angel, they saw the plates, and that they heard the voice of God. This was after the translation of the Book of Mormon, and that they had a vision of the plates. And that all three, not only do they never deny their testimonies of seeing the angel in the plates, but throughout their lives, they reaffirm over and over and over again, particularly David Whitmer, who's the most interviewed witness, that they know they saw the angel in the plates. And all three of them at one point leave the church. David Whitmer never returns, but Martin and Oliver do. But all three continue throughout their lives to bear testimony of the Book of Mormon. And critics, they tend to focus on a few second or third hand statements, particularly Martin Harris, like I saw with spiritual eyes, or, I saw the plates as I see a city through a mountain, or I think I saw Jesus in the form of a deer. And if you just focus on them, you might think, oh, are they credible? Do they have this visionary mindset? But what was really enlightening to me was reading a lot of their primary statements, first or second hand. And a really great book is Investigating Book of Mormon Witnesses by Richard Lloyd Anderson, which I highly recommend. Is that the vast majority of their statements, they're emphatic that they know they saw the angel, they know they saw the plates. Martin Harris, there's so many times where people ask him, like, did you really see the angel in the plates? And he'd be like, do you see my hand? Like, as sure as you see my hand, I saw the angel in the plates. Or do you see the sun in the sky? As sure as you do, I saw the angel in the plates. And David Whitmer was once asked, are you sure you didn't like hallucinate or imagine or have some sort of mental disturbance? And he like emphatically responded, like, no, it wasn't a hallucination. I saw with my eyes, I heard with my ears, I know whereof I speak. And whether or not they really did see the angel in the plates, that's faith on our part. But if we're representing their testimonies accurately and being transparent, they know and are adamant they saw the angel in the plates. And added to that as well, the Book of Mormon prophesies both in the Book of Ether and I think it's 2 Nephi 27 and in the Doctrine and Covenants that the three witnesses would see the gold plates. And if Joseph, made this all up, that's quite an amazing thing for him to prophesy. It's quite a bold thing to prophesy in the Book of Mormon. And then for all three of them to have this mass vision hallucination, audiovisual experience, which they all never denied. So I think that's quite remarkable. And I think the combination of the eight witnesses supports the authenticity of the plates. Because if you just had the three witnesses, you could say maybe they're all just had a mystic visionary hallucination. But the eight witnesses claim to see and handle the plates as well. And similarly, they never denied their testimony. It was very natural. They hefted the plates, they saw the engravings. And even though some left the church, John Whitmer, I remember one of his quotes when he was most disillusioned and antagonistic towards Joseph. He was asked, I think it was by Turley, but you're one of the witnesses of the plates. How can you be questioning? And he was like, well, yeah, I saw and handled them, but I don't know if they're authentic characters or not. So even when he was at his most disillusioned with Joseph, he still didn't deny seeing and handling the plates as well, supporting that there was plate artifact. And then you've got other people like Mary Whitmer was shown the plates by the angel when she was milking cows. There's a couple of accounts like that. And other people like Emma or Josiah Stoll or other family members, Joseph Knight Sr., who claim to like feel the plates covered in the cloth, supporting that there is in fact a plate artifact. So for me, I think the combination of the 3 witnesses, the 8 witnesses, and other unofficial witnesses supports both the reality of gold plates and the authenticity of the Book of Mormon. And if Joseph made it up, then he would have had to like manufacture his own set of plates and then trick the 8 witnesses. The 3 witnesses have some mass hallucination experience, which again was prophesied, and that's also pretty hard to believe. Like, I know believing in an angel in plates is hard to believe. So I think their testimonies are powerful and support the divine authenticity of the Book of Mormon. I think that's one of the reasons why God provided it. Because if we just had, Joseph getting plates from a hill, claiming he got them from an angel, producing a book, and then the plates are taken away, it can sound a bit fishy, but I think that's why witnesses were provided.
Yeah. And it's just like, what what do you do with these people? Like, you have to do something with these witnesses. Like, they're either telling the truth or they've been tricked somehow, but we're adamant throughout the rest of their lives that they weren't tricked. Like, how do you pull that off in 1829 rural New York? They were either tricked, telling the truth, or they were liars. And that's a lot of liars to round up and get to uphold this lie for the rest of their lives, that like they suffered greatly for. Some of them, like Oliver Cowdery, lost work because of it, work opportunities, the great persecution throughout the years. Like, why would you uphold a lie like that? And some people say, well, they didn't want to rat on Joseph because then everybody would know that they were liars, and they valued their integrity. And it's like, if they valued their integrity that much, then they wouldn't have lied in the first place. Like, it's just, you have to do something with these witnesses. And I think you're right. I think it is one of the major, like, at least for me, it's a major obstacle in my way between me and the exit door when it comes to this faith. Like, I'm not going for that exit door without, dealing with this. I have to deal with this. And just there are ways that people do it, and that's up to them. But I'm with you. I haven't found a way to kind of naturalistically explain away their testimonies.
And Richard Lloyd Anderson in his book, he had a lot of sources about David Whitmer or Oliver Cowdery, that these were really respected men in their community. I believe David later became mayor. Joseph was like a school teacher and then later a lawyer. So these were considered like honest, respectable men. So I think a lot of critics believe they're more sincere but mistaken or hallucinated. But yeah, I think it's pretty impressive, the witnesses for the Book of
Yeah.
Mormon.
Okay. Number
Awesome.
3.
Number three is old world geography convergences. I know you've done a previous episode on this, and you've had on Neil Rapley, who's like an expert. So Lehi and his family leaving from Jerusalem, traveling down to the Red Sea. There's plausible candidates for like the Valley of Lemuel and Shazer, and them traveling sort of in a southeastern direction, which scholars say correlates really well with the incense trail. And they're naming all these locations, and then they come to a place they say like which was called Nahum, where they bury Ishmael. I believe in the 90s they found an altar in Marib, Yemen, with the inscription NHM, and it's near like a burial site as well. And something that Neil Rapley I don't know if he pointed this out to you. I haven't listened to your interview, but he said to me how before they found the altar, that scholars, when they've been analyzing the text of the Book of Mormon and Lehi's travel with Arabian geography, that that was already the rough area that they believed Nahum would be. So finding the altar sort of confirmed that, okay, this is in the area where they're expecting to find it anyway, and it dates to the right century. It has the right consonants. You know, there's no vowels in Hebrew or Semitic script, and it dates to the right time. And even told me that they found the name Ishmael dated to the 5th or 6th century, but there's no way we can know it's the right one. And some people might say, okay, this is just a coincidence. It's just NHM on an altar. And I believe the word Nahum in Hebrew, it sort of has meaning to mourn or console. And it talks about in the text that the daughters of Ishmael did mourn over the death of their father. So this could maybe be a Hebrew pun. But what I think converges really well, not just like Nahum, but the whole travel, especially is the eastward, nearly eastward turn to Bountiful, because there's a turn in the incense trail, and scholars have found a couple of candidates for Bountiful. One is Cor Carfot, and it matches sort of Nephi's description for Bountiful really well. It talks about there being, you know, timber and honey or cliffs, lots of fruit, and being like this lush oasis on the coast of Arabia. And to me, it just seems to converge really well. You know, the whole travel in the Arabian geography. I don't know if I would say like this is 100% bullseye that proves the Book of Mormon. It'd be nice if we had like an inscription like Nephi was here. But the question I've sort of asked myself is if this was a historical travel, what better evidence realistically would I expect to find? And I feel like it all correlates and interlocks really well together, supporting that I think this was a historical travel. So I think the old world geography is supportive evidence for the Book of Mormon.
Yeah, we had Neil on and he talked all about it, and it's compelling. Like, and again, it's either a really interesting coincidence, or but at the same time, like, what are the chances, that that Joseph Smith would just happen to pick a name in that, secluded desert location that just happened to match an actual place in that secluded desert location at that same time. Like, it's just like weighing the probabilities there. And then the other thought is, okay, well, maybe Joseph was just doing some kind of really deep research,
Well,
and
see,
he
whenever I was a critic or an unbeliever, whenever I really looked at how well it converged together, I think I watched like an LDS Truth Claims episode and I think a video you did in Evidence Central whenever I was out of the church. And I thought to myself, this converges too well in my mind to be a coincidence. Joseph must have had a map, something of
Mhm.
Arabia that he was drawing upon because it just seemed to converge and correspond too well to be lucky coincidence.
Yeah. And that, but then you have the question of, okay, when was Joseph doing this? Like, why is there no hint in in the historical record that he was doing this? Where was he going to find this information? And then how did he regurgitate it to your first point? How did he regurgitate it from memory, during the translation of the Book of Mormon? So it's just like he's either really, really sneaky and really, really smart at a really young age with a fantastic memory, a photographic memory essentially, uh, or it's true, or he's fooling everybody some other way. I don't know, but it's just it's a fascinating point, and I agree that it's another one of those things that you got to
And,
grapple
and
with.
just one thought before you jump on the next one, sort of linking back to the miraculous sort of dictation and translation of the Book of Mormon. If Joseph had have taken like years and he worked alone in a room and he had loads of like resources and books he could have been drawing upon, then I might find some of the naturalistic explanations a little bit more plausible. But the circumstances as well as how it came forth, it makes it more remarkable to me.
Yeah, like the guy's a farmer. His family's
Yeah,
out farming. Like, he didn't have this big library in his home. It's just yeah, his level of education doesn't match what he would need in order to be producing this kind of stuff. Okay, point number 4. Is that what we're on?
yes, number 4. So this one I'm kind of combining ancient sort of names that have been found in the Book of Mormon and some ancient Hebrew literary elements. So we'll start with some of the names. So I remember reading an article on Scripture Central about the name Ulek, who's identified as the son of Zedekiah in the Book of Mormon. And we have Malchiah in the Old Testament, who's son of the king, and at the time it was Zedekiah. But they found a stamp seal, I think it was in Paleo Hebrew, in Jerusalem in like the 1980s. I think the name was, I'm going to say this wrong, Malkayu on it. And that Mulek is a very plausible sort of shortened Hebrew variant for that, kind of like a nickname. I thought that was really interesting, that Joseph Smith put a name in there identifying Mulek as the son of Zedekiah. And actually, this is fits really plausibly as a shortened Hebrew variant for Malkayu. And other ancient Hebrew names like Alma, Sariah, Sam, and some critics would have attacked those names as, either being the wrong gender or these aren't ancient names, which have later found to be ancient Hebrew names. And even some of the weird names, like Egyptian names like Pahoran, Pahanchi, Pakumenai, which seem like this is just weird, made up names, which Joseph couldn't have got from the Bible, that turn out to be authentic ancient Egyptian names, which I think is really interesting. Jershon as well is referred to as a place for I think it was the anti-Nephi Lehis. It's like their land of inheritance was called Jershon, but in Hebrew Jershon means land of inheritance. So some of those things I think are quite interesting. I think like the etymology of Nephi, they talk about like fair and good, and those things are used a lot by Nephi. So I think some of the names in the Book of Mormon are really interesting and seem to correspond with ancient Hebrew or Egyptian names. And then there's sort of Hebrew literary elements that scholars have found in the Book of Mormon. So Hebraisms and chiasmus. Hebraisms being things like, rod of iron or plates of brass, or like I've dreamed a dream, those sorts of things, or even the repetitive and it came to pass, that it was Mark Twain who mocked that repetitive use being a Hebraism in the Book of Mormon. And some people would say, well, some of these things exist in the Bible, so it could have been Joseph maybe imitating the Bible or other books of his day. I find one of the most impressive Hebraisms the if and conditionals, because that's not how we speak really in English. It's like, if you do this, then this. But it's very interesting. The Book of Mormon has in the original manuscript if and conditionals, and that's how Hebrew authors would have written as well. So I think that some of the Hebraisms I think are likely to be influenced by there being some Hebrew in the underlying text, mixed with Egyptian. And chiasmus as well. Again, people would say that there's some chiasmus in the Bible or in the Doctrine and Covenants. So chiasmus itself it's not evidence that it's ancient, but there's some very long and complex chiasmus in the Book of Mormon. I think Alma 36 is the most notable one, which, what do you find more probable, that Joseph was just able to orally dictate and compose that himself, or that some ancient Nephi author who was trained in this Hebrew style of writing included that, and that it's a translation? So I think those things are definitely, evidence as well. And the Book of Mormon, Nephi talks about it being written in the language of the Egyptians, but also the learning of the Jews. So likely a mixture of maybe Hebrew and Egyptian. So I think those things are interesting evidences for the Book of Mormon.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, like, what do you do with it? Like, either Joseph Smith got really, really lucky, or he was really, really secretly smart, or it's real, you know? And we did a whole episode for our faith and belief segment on if and conditionals. And so if anybody's wondering
Yeah,
what we're talking about there, go watch
yeah.
that video.
Yeah, and I think even if people say that some Hebraisms are in the Bible or there's some chiasmus in the Bible, I feel like that doesn't fully answer some of those Hebraisms that it seems like Joseph wouldn't have known, or the really complex chiasmus.
Well, we would expect them in the Bible because, the Old Testament at least was written in ancient Hebrew.
Yeah.
But there are studies that have been done where some of these other claimed chiasms, they've tested them they've kind of formulated an algorithm or what do you want to call it? A formula to kind of see what the chances are that this could have just happened by chance
Yes, yes, I remember reading that.
or if they were intentional. And uh, so some people, like you said, claim that there are chiasms in the Doctrine and Covenants, which isn't supposed to have come from ancient Hebrew. So it's not really significant that it shows up in the Book of Mormon. But when you test those chiasms, the probability is pretty high that they are just there by chance. But when you
Right.
test the ones, at least some of the chiasms in the Book of Mormon, it's like approaching 0% that they're there by chance. So again, that doesn't prove that the Book of Mormon is necessarily true and authentic, but at the very least, like even if Joseph is a fraud, like I think it proves that some like serious planning and intentionality went into this. Because some of the theories are that he just kind of made it up on the fly and it was just kind of a stream of consciousness thing, which the text chiasmus and other elements of the text just kind of, I feel, remove that option from the table because it is so complex and intricate. But yeah, fantastic point. I'm glad you brought that up.
Thanks. The last one, this is probably the most controversial one because the church doesn't have an official position where Book of Mormon geography took place, just that it took place somewhere in the Americas. And some people are proponents of the Heartland model that's more in North America in the Great Lakes region. Other people that it took place in Mesoamerica. I'm really interested in both geographies, both models, and there can be a lot of contention and division over it. But I lean more with Mesoamerica. And I've interviewed scholars on it, and I've read Brant Gardner's book, and I have John Sorensen's book, and it's sort of looking for correspondences between Mesoamerica, the geography, civilizations, or things in Mayan culture, with the text of the Book of Mormon. And I think we used to have this view that let's find the Book of Mormon in Mesoamerica. I feel like what they have done is, can we find Mesoamerica in the Book of Mormon, having more of this view that the Nephites and the Lamanites and the Jaredites were sort of among the civilizations and participated in that culture? And can we see hints of Mesoamerica in the Book of Mormon? And there's quite a few correspondences. I'll maybe just name a couple that I found interesting. They don't really prove anything, but it's some things that like make a little bit more sense in that context. So one, for example, and I've just read this yesterday, was the sermon that Jacob gives, calling the Nephites to repentance for costly apparel, having jewelry and really fancy clothing, and wanting to take like wives and concubines. And around that time in Mesoamerica, according to scholars, that the Mayans would have displayed their wealth. They would have had costly apparel, and that they also would have had like more wives, more concubines, so that they could have produced more, so that they could have traded more, and therefore had costly apparel. And I thought that was really interesting how it seemed that kind of fits in the Mesoamerican context. Another one would be the warfare in the Book of Mormon. I thought correlated very well with Mayan warfare, the seasons of warfare, the description of fortifications as well. I think it talks about Moroni there being like heaps of earth and like palisades or boards raised up to the height of man, and those match some of the description of some of the fortifications in Mesoamerica and some of the weapons used. Because the Book of Mormon talks about like slings and stones and throwing arrows, which is quite interesting. Because I think in Joseph's day, and to me, I'm like, no, you shoot a bow and arrow, but a weapon that the Mayans had was called like an atlatl. It was kind of like a arrow thrower, kind of like a spear thrower. I
Hmm.
kind of thought that was a really interesting thing in the text. And one more I'll give is in the Book of Helaman, Nephi goes onto like a tower in his garden, and it says in the text that it's near a highway, near like a chief marketplace or something like that, and how those existed in Mesoamerica. And it's just kind of like a side note, but it fits quite well. So there are lots of wee things that I thought converged and correlated quite well. And probably the most interesting thing was I did an interview with Jerry Grover, who's like a geologist and a researcher in the Book of Mormon. And he looked at John Swartz's Mesoamerican geography model, and he wanted to test it geologically. And he looked at the destruction that happened in Third Nephi, and all of the hazards and destruction that happens. So like it talks about like there being darkness, storms, whirlwinds, lightning, sharp lightnings. They couldn't light a torch. Later sunken cities, and I just grew up thinking like this was just all supernatural. But he said that a volcanic eruption and an earthquake would explain the destruction and all of those specific hazards. And he talked about the San Martin volcano in Mesoamerica, that there was an eruption and an earthquake dated to the first century AD, but they can't date it to the exact year, that would account for or correspond with the description of the destruction in Third Nephi as well, supporting sort of the Mesoamerican geography model. So at least, even if you don't see it as like, oh, this is evidence that proves, you can at least see that geologically it's not impossible or implausible, the things that happen in Third Nephi. But I'm still very much open to the Heartland model, and if there's a better model or better evidence, I'm open to shifting. But those are some things I thought were quite neat,
And
which I think
and
you could view as evidence.
yeah, well, and talking about Mesoamerica, like it's also interesting to look at what kind of the science, the archaeology was saying about Mesoamerica in Joseph Smith's time versus
Right.
today. Because what Joseph Smith was saying about these Book of Mormon peoples, or what the Book of Mormon is saying about these peoples, like back in the day, like these civilizations, Mesoamerica was much, much smaller and simpler than it is today. And so as we've gone on and learned more about these areas, that there were massive civilizations and complex societies and raised highways and mass
Yeah.
warfare and things like that, it as time has gone on, like it has come to match more and more what the Book of Mormon is saying about, these areas, assuming that the Book of Mormon talks about Mesoamerica, of course. Um, that's not to say, of course, that there aren't any challenges there. Like we haven't found
Yeah,
a
sure.
tablet with Hebrew on it yet. Um, but just to see how things have changed as time has gone on has been interesting.
Yeah. That's sort of like my top five evidences in a nutshell. And I would just say in summary that none of these things I think prove the Book of Mormon beyond a reasonable doubt. And as you said, I don't think they're intended to prove in some sort of scientific factual way, because I think the main purpose of the Book of Mormon to come to know of its truth is through sort of like a spiritual method, that it claims to have spiritual truths in it. And Moroni and other Nephi authors invite us to study, to read the book, to ponder, to diligently seek, and that God will give you an answer. And I think these things, they can reinforce one's faith or testimony, particularly in light of maybe criticisms or challenges. And I think they can also cause somebody who has dismissed the Book of Mormon out of hand to maybe reconsider it, or at least take it more seriously, and at least acknowledge maybe why some believers might see some things as evidence in favor for the Book of Mormon. But to me, I view the Book of Mormon, I view it as a miracle, uh, the coming forth. Even if you believe it was naturally created by Joseph, there's still some very miraculous of elements of how he was able to do it. But like I said at the start, the primary reason I'm a believer is my spiritual experiences, and that's my bias. I think even if in my mind I could see some of these things as compelling arguments, um, the conversion in your heart, I think, comes from the text, from the connection that you have with God, and believing that you can connect with him and receive spiritual answers and revelation in your life. And I think that's the main purpose, is to bring us to God, is to bring us to Christ, is to help us repent and find spiritual answers in our life. And all these things are interesting, but I don't think that's the main purpose of the text.
I love that you mentioned your kind of personal spiritual witness. And I think it's important to remind people that just because maybe your personal experience isn't, replicatable for other people or quantifiable scientifically, it doesn't mean it's not true. And it doesn't mean it's not valuable and real. There's some things that just, they're not easy to replicate. What comes to mind is a story from history where some, oh gosh, I'm gonna mess it up. We talked about it in our episode with, I think, Carrie Muhlstein, but some students at Harvard, I'm sure I'm botching this story, but some students at Harvard saw a flaming rock fall from the sky, a meteor. And they go to the leading scientists of the day and they say, "We saw this rock fall from the sky." And they're like, "No, you didn't. Like, you're full of it. Like, okay, replicate it." You're like, "Well, I can't replicate it. Like, it was a once in a lifetime thing that I saw this, star fall from the sky, but it really happened and it was true." And so I think that those spiritual experiences that maybe are, you know, those meteors in our lives that maybe we can't explain to somebody else, but they happened to us and they were real, like those are totally valid. And I love that you've emphasized that when it comes to testimony. Do you have if people have questions for you, I guess they can find you on your channel. Do you have other means of contact? How can they get in touch
Um,
with you directly?
I have an email. It's stephen.murphy04031996 at gmail.com. I'm also have a Facebook profile, Mormonism with the Murph, so they can send me a message or an email, or leave a comment on YouTube if they have any questions. I have done a series where I've dived into a lot of episodes, responded to also criticisms as well. So I've not hid away from some of the challenges or criticisms leveled against, and interview different scholars to get their take as well.
Fantastic. Stephen, thank you so much for being with us. Everyone watching, thank you for being here and have a great day.